What is up, everybody? Good morning, Jeremy Lord. Good morning, chat. Jeremy, how are you?
Good, thanks, man. How are you going?
Really good. I'm loving these ways, these mornings, because I don't have to get into emails straight away. I just get to hang out with cool, creative people doing amazing stuff that I can't do yet. So I'm enjoying these mornings a lot. Hello, chat. Festus in the house. Hi, Anna. Alex, that was an amazing stream. Alex, if you're still here, if you're still around, he was doing some amazing stuff in Dimension, some typography, which we're going to be doing some typography here as well with Jeremy, Sam. Yeah, it's great. Ben Married in the house as well. What's up, Ben?
Hey,
Um,
Ben.
so good to see all of you this morning or this evening or tonight or wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Um, but yeah, we had a great stream yesterday. We had a great time with you, Jeremy. Maybe you could give us a bit of a recap on what we did. You're much better at talking about your work than I am.
Yeah, so what we kind of did yesterday, if you guys can see my screen now, is we talked a little bit about sketching and obviously digital inking. I was hoping we'd get to coloring, but my kind of adding in details on and on and on kind of got away from me a little bit. So this is basically where we left off yesterday. With a few kind of tweaks. As always, I kind of took this on and added a few things. So you can see the sketch that we ended up with yesterday, and I've kind of gone in and made a couple of little edits here and there, added a bit of kind of like samurai helmet detailed, fixed a little bit of the face, reordered some layers around. But all in all, it's basically the same thing for all intents and purposes. So um, that was the kind of the gist of what we looked at yesterday. Today we're going to get in some type. So we're probably going to pop some type like up here, just above her, and we're going to do that today in Illustrator. And we're going to make a little bit of custom type. And we're going to export that to a Photoshop layer, and then we're going to play with some gradient overlays and different kind of special effects to make it a little bit more 80s, to give it that real kind of like 80s pop. Add in some flares, some neons, all that kind of jazz. So
Nice.
yeah, today's all going to be color, color, color.
Bit of Michael Bay lens flare at the end, just for safekeeping. I like it.
Could do that. Might
um,
happen.
it might happen. Cool. I'm just going to quickly show what else is coming up. So this is us today. So it's Thursday here. So custom typography with Jeremy at the moment. Tomorrow we have some tips in Premiere Pro with Ian Hay and at the same time. So right now, tomorrow, and then on Saturday we have some speed painting with Jeff Chen. If you haven't seen that, it's pretty amazing. If you're interested in Jeremy's work, I'm sure you'll be interested in Jeff's as well. So that's going to be lots and lots of fun. So I hope you can join us. And hey to everyone else in the chat. So before we get stuck into it, just thought I'd sort of share. We've got a little timer in the corner. The timer is just a little bit of an indicator, so we can have a bit of a break in the middle, a bit of Q&A. Maybe Jeremy's. I think you're using your Wacom today. He can stretch his
Yeah.
wrist, and it's important for all of us to look after ourselves. So he's going to take a minute or two to take a break there, and we'll dump any questions, any sort of meaning of life questions, any of those bigger, harder questions. We'll dump in the middle. So feel free to ask questions as we go. Thank you, Joanna, for moderating the chat for us today as well. But yeah, ask your questions. We had lots of great questions yesterday.
Yeah, the more questions, the better. It's always super fun for me to kind of do this as I'm talking, and answer your questions as well. It gives it a little bit of variety as well. So yeah, please ask away.
Ask away.
Just adding in a few little last minute tweaks here before we get going.
Cool.
Um, all right. So what I thought we might start with is, obviously this is looking quite line worky. We had a comment yesterday, actually, a few comments yesterday about how the kind of sketch looks really cool, and I've got these really kind of
Mm,
strong, hard outlines. And I was actually really happy that that was mentioned, because it is something that I kind of struggle with. Of like, I think this looks really cool just on its own with like the sketch and the line work, and it kind of
yeah.
shows the process behind it. Um, Unfortunately, one of the things that I like to do when I'm adding color is, and this is the whole reason. I will kind of do this, I've got my little color wheel up here. So these are just kind of the select colors. We can talk about that in a little while. But what happens here is basically I can use these really thick outlines as a guide to help me kind of mess up. So I can do this really kind of shoddy line behind this outline, and it won't show because I've got this really thick outline. So I find that a lot easier for this kind of flat color look to be able to work with these thick colors. So yeah, unfortunately that means that the pencil work just has to kind of go away and die. But I am a big fan of kind of showing my work as well. And it's I was really kind of pleased to see that that's also something that a lot of other people kind of look to, is kind of seeing the progress behind that as well. So yeah, that was really cool to hear that. So let's just pop in a background color in here real quick. Just as a quick little tip, I'm using Command Delete to fill with my background, or Option or Alt Delete if you're on a PC, to fill with a foreground color. They're just like super, super quick little tips rather than going into edit, fill, all that kind of stuff. It's a lot easier just to do it that way. So I'm just doing this just so that we can get a bit more of a sense of how the color is gonna work in this, and we can throw some colors in. But before we do all that, I'm just going to save this, and we're going to jump into Illustrator. So one of the questions that we often get as well is, why don't you do your work in Illustrator and sort of actually paint in Illustrator? And whilst Illustrator does have brush tools that are really good because they're actually quite smooth as well, and you can get some nice tapered edges, there's just a few little kind of quirks that that personally don't work for me in Illustrator. I'm not saying that they're necessarily bad things. It's just, it's not my flavor, I guess. Sticking with cooking analogies, it's just not something that I really like, but I can understand why other people like it. It's kind of like coriander. And give us a shout if you hate coriander like me.
I hate
as well.
Coriander. This is the no coriander stream. Coriander-free zone, pineapple and pizza stream.
Yep, totally. All right, so we're going to do a basic type in Illustrator. So Illustrator is really, really solid with using type. And I could do, the more traditional thing is to look at doing this kind of like real, kind of flashy script kind of type in Illustrator, because that's what Illustrator's kind of really good at, is it smooths these things down. And what we're going to be doing today, I'm going to be doing something a lot more kind of techie, because it'll fit with what we're doing in our illustration here. It's going to be a little bit cyberpunky, and it's also going to be a little bit easier and faster to build. So I've got this little template here that I've created, and this is going to be the basis for my letters. So first thing that I need to do is turn my grid on, and that is Command apostrophe, turns your grid on. You can see, as you guys are probably well aware at this stage, all the little keyboard shortcuts are on the things here. So what I've just done is I've just shown the grid, and then I can snap to grid as well. So that's just Shift Command apostrophe. And what that's going to allow me to do is have any shape that I create is going to snap to those things. So it's going to be always nice and clean and even. And that's just going to make my life a lot easier. The next thing that I need to do is kind of decide on the proportion of my letter and what's going to work best for me. So I've got two different things here. Because I'm going to write out the word Onobugeisha, I've got mostly letters that are going to be the same kind of width. And so all of that can kind of work well, but I am going to have an I in there that's going to come in and kind of maybe throw a spanner in the works. So I just need to plan for that, and that's going to be that little guy just there. So all the rest can kind of stay in that square that I've already done, and that's going to work really well for me, but I do need to plan for that a little bit. So the measurements that I've created here aren't random. They're basic sort of proportions. So what I've started with is a square, but square is not super good for making letters. So I could extend this down to like 3 by 4, right? So I've got the big squares here that you guys can see, full of 8 by 8 little squares. So that's a interesting proportion. I just feel like that's a little bit too tall. So I'm going to go down to 3.5. So we got 3 plus another half of a square here. And I could leave it at just 3 whole squares wide by 3.5. That would make sense from a kind of a geometric mathematical perspective. But what I'm going to do is, if you look at this, you can see the center of my shape here is right smack bang in the middle. Now, what that's going to mean is if I'm creating an O, I'm going to have a double square for the counter, and I kind of don't want that. I think that's too open. I want to keep it a little bit more closed on the counters of my type. So I need to make that only 1 square. But because I've got an even number, there's no middle pixel. I need an odd number to do that, if that makes sense. So this guy is closer to the left side than the right side. And so that's going to be a little bit tricky. So what I do just simply to get rid of that is I will just knock off 1 square off the edge here. And so it's 3 squares minus 1 tiny square. And that means now that my center is actually going to live inside of a kind of pixel here, if that makes sense. And I can have a 1 square live in the middle of my actual shape. So again, like the proportions that you create for your ones can be whatever you want. I just like to use that because it's a good kind of, feels like a good sort of feng shui proportional size. And then for my narrower letter, so there's always a 2 square gap in between all my letters, I'm going to bring that down to same. It should be 2 squares, but it's 2 minus 1, so that I've got that middle bit. Just again, I could just leave it at 2 whole squares, but just to keep it nice and kind of steady and even throughout. So that's my basic template for my type done, right? And I've got that. I'm going to label that type, and this one's going to come back later, and we're going to do a little bevel effect on this as well, but we're just going to hide that for now. So I can start.
Festus was asking, have you ever tried using like a plugin for creating fonts? Festus was saying there's FontSelf plugin for Illustrator where you can create your own fonts as like a completed set. Have you ever mucked around with anything like that?
I haven't, and to be honest, I'm not aware of a lot of these ones because I don't really do this very often.
Yeah.
And when I do, I tend to just kind of create it myself.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there's a bunch of things that can really help to do this kind of stuff, to plug in settings. But because my one's kind of be a little bit more bespoke and custom, there's not necessarily going to be this sense of like regularity throughout the whole thing. I'm going to do a few different things. So it's a little bit more illustrative and a little bit less
more like a one-off than creating like a font family that has leading and kerning that you want to use in multiple times.
I think that's the difference here is I'm not creating a typeface. I'm creating an illustration that just so happens to look like letters. If you get what I mean, it's like it's not. This is not a usable typeface. It's just it's an illustration, as if it was handcrafted. Same thing. It's a handwriting. It's an image that's made of letters. And so we're going to start mucking around here and making this look a little bit more like an O. I could leave it square, but let's start playing with some angles. So I'm going to knock in to about 4, and I've added, I'm basically doing I'm using my pen tool here with the add anchor point function, and I'm just literally getting that to go there. So I've got 4 squares down, 4 squares across, and then I'm going to delete anchor point, and that's going to snap into there. So that's a nice clean 45-degree angle. And I can do the same thing down here. So I can add my 2 anchor points, 1 and 2, and then get rid of that one. And I've got the start of my O. And that's just going to make my O just to feel a little bit more. I could do it to the other sides, but again, this is more just kind of like, this is that step where it's like, now add some grated Parmesan, just add however much you want. This isn't necessarily like what you should do, and these are the proportions. This is just what I'm kind of feeling today. And then we're going to stick this counter in the middle here. And so we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 from the bottom, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 from the top. So that's nice and even in the center there, but it probably just needs to shuffle over 1 so that we've got the same distance on the left as we do on the right. Yep. Quick check. That's all good. So we get rid of that. So we've got the start of our O. And then I'm going to do the dot of my I. So again, I could potentially have a bit of a play around and just do that. That would make most sense when I'm doing my I here. But again, I'm looking for a little bit more kind of interest and style. So I'm going to give it an I that's going to fit as a kind of an angle. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to go to 4 and do that same trick again. But this time I'm also going to add in another one on either side. And I'm actually going to get rid of the segment in the middle. And I'm going to take these 2 points and Command J to join them, and then these 2 points, Command J to join those two. So I've created my the corner of my eye here. It's probably not enough, so I'm going to shuffle this over a little bit more. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a little bit more visible. It's working a little bit better. I might even do a 5th one just to be on the safe side.
Edgy.
So that's my eye, and I've just got oi.
It's very Australian.
It is. So that's going to be the basis of all my type. Like, for instance, if I was doing an N, I would literally just duplicate this over, get rid of the corners here. And again, because I've got snap to grid, that's snapping nicely to all my points. And I could literally then just take all of this and move one down to here and another one up here. And that starts to create kind of a little bit of an N. I'll probably do a little bit more detail. And to be fair, I would also most likely keep the same angle as I did before, that 45-degree angle, and move that around. So you get the idea. I've got a lot of letters to get through, so we're not going to do all the letters. I've got a little thing that, like, here's what I prepared earlier. But before we do that, this might seem a little bit strange, but this is kind of, again, because I'm going to take this into Photoshop. And I know already what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and give it this kind of like beveled edge, which Photoshop can do, that kind of a little bit of a beveled edge. But if I do it myself, I'm going to have a lot more control over what's happening. So I'm going to start up here on my new layer and go down into these corners. And again, because I've got snap to grid, it's working out quite well. I want to change the color of that to, we'll go with a nice neon blue. Blue and pink will work out just fine. It doesn't really matter what colors I do this, just as long as I've got alternating colors down here. So again, down here, 45, 45, straight across. That's all good. And then I can do the same thing in here. And they're all kind of snapping nicely. And then this guy is going to be pink. The reason for that is, again, it's going to be a lot more apparent when I am switching over to Photoshop. Why I've kind of done this. This is basically kind of like your green screen. Doing these guys is going to allow me to select them because they're different colors later on in Photoshop. It's going to speak kind of like Photoshop language a lot better. And it's going to save me a ton of work later on. So now we can go into these guys because I've already done the work.
Would you sketch this out beforehand, or would you just sort of jump in? I know we just jumped in on the stream, but normally would you like draw draw a couple of versions, or do you usually jump straight into the software? Not necessarily, because I would generally do. So if we look at my sketches, I should have, so I've done a little sketch of where the type will go. And I just work with these blocks. So the blocks just allow me to have a little bit more kind of sense of proportion of where things are going. But it just so happens that I
what I'm doing now in Illustrator with this kind of style fits really well with the sense of what I'm doing in that kind of cyberpunk style. So it just really helps to do that. But I will every now and then do this thing where I will play with different ones, and then I will absolutely 100% sketch it. That's going to be completely crucial for me to do that. Otherwise, it's just going to be like, I'm just going to lose myself in trying to do things in Illustrator.
Yeah.
So having that roadmap is absolutely like vital when you're doing that.
And when you do sketch,
because
do you sketch
digitally?
Because I know you have like pretty much every device under the sun. Do you always sketch digitally, or would you bust out an old school notebook?
Curiously, I probably would do a notebook, simply because when you're doing type, it's the one thing that you really need that kind of resistance of the paper to work with.
Right.
Otherwise, it gets a little bit too hard to kind of do those lines. And again, like a lot of those devices have different nibs and things that we can work with, and there's smoothing as well in Photoshop that you can help you kind of do all those things. But it just feels a little bit nicer using the old tools, and you get that kind of thing a little bit more. But I will often do that kind of stuff as well digitally. But it's just a lot nicer to do it analog as well. But again, this is not something that I do very, very often, adding type or at least custom type to my illustrations. It fits with what we're doing today. So it's kind of a nice little kind of change of pace from always Photoshop.
Yeah. Cool.
Right, so we've got the bulk of our letter here, but as you can see, these guys look a little bit thicker than these guys. So we're going to have to shuffle these over a little bit. So so I'm going to unsnap the grid because I don't want what just happened to happen. So Command-Shift-, and that's going to allow me to shift these guys over, and I'm going to eyeball it. So that was
throwing away all the technical mathematics that was just done.
Yeah.
Now you're going to eyeball it. Nice.
1, 2, 3, 4, and that'll kind of do nicely there. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the overall kind of bevel of what I'm kind of trying to do here.
Right.
And again, I would just repeat that process on and on for all these different things. And they do need to be on separate colors. I could even go as far as taking all of those and sticking them on a separate layer as well. So all my blue ones are on one layer and all my pink ones are on another layer. It's just a matter of like how helpful that's going to be later on or not, and what I'm likely to kind of do with this. So we're going to leave it like this for now, and I'm going to jump ahead to my kind of finished version of that, which is this guy. So that's what it looks like in the end. And you can see I've got a few black ones here because on the corner of my eye, obviously I can't alternate in between two ones. There's always going to be a connecting thing. So I've just done those black. And you can see the same thing happening over here where there's an uneven amount of sides. So yeah, so all I've got here is, if you get rid of those tech lines, which are just literally just pencil strokes, pencil strokes that are just giving it that extra kind of cyberpunk effect. All I've got are my tech lines on one layer, my bevels on another layer, and then the main body type on this layer. These are probably not the colors that that type is going to stay as, but we've got a nice kind of even flow throughout the type. We got our bevel, we got everything ready to go for us to potentially kind of take this into Photoshop. But before we do, what I kind of want to show you guys is we're going to take this, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to lock that again. And I'm going to change the color of this guy to like a black, and I'm going to give him a black stroke as well. So we can't see that because obviously he's behind this guy. But important to grab this one. I'm going to group it as well just for sake of cleanliness. And then I'm going to duplicate this one as well. So I've got two of the same ones, And then I'm going to lock this guy and select the one in the background and give him a different color. Again, like none of this is going to show right now, but you'll see how it all kind of comes in a sec. So what I've basically got is I've got one layer black and a duplicate of that layer in pink. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pink one and I'm going to move it somewhere else, like down here. And then I'm going to go in and select all of these. Important to have every other one locked out so you can't select those. And I'm going to go to my blend tool, which is this guy. So the blend tool allows you to do this thing. It's something that Ben did on Tuesday, was showed a little animation of like a circle going into a triangle and kind of morph. So the blend tool allows you to do that, right? The purpose of the blend tool, basically, if I do a quick little demo, is if I've got a square and then I do a circle, and then I'm going to change the color of this one as well, just so you can see how that works with the color. I'm going to do a blend tool. I'm going to click once on the square and once on the circle. And if I double click on that, you'll see if I do like 4 steps, not 444 steps, you see that that square progressively turns to blue and turns into that thing. So it allows you to kind of just do a merge in between one shape and the other. And whatever you kind of place this, it'll kind of calculate that. If I change that to a different color, it'll change the gradient. So blend tools are kind of a cool thing for doing that. But that's the intended use of the blend tool. So I'm going to do this. It's going to work in the same way, but what's going to happen is this. And then if I double click on that, I can say either do a smooth color. I want specified steps, and I want to turn on preview, and I want my specified steps. So this can start to really kind of like test of power on your computer. If you've got an old laptop, it's really going to struggle with this, because we're going to do 350 steps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
and that's
steps.
what's going to happen.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Okay, so
just a quick shout out to Mark Conlon and Alex Mills in the chat. It's good to see you guys here.
Hey.
It's nice. It's nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good to have so many people in as well.
Yeah, it's been great.
So so this is basically kind of like 3Ding the type. There is a 3D tool in Photoshop, in Illustrator, and there is also one in Photoshop too. But what I really like about this is basically I can now edit this as much as I like, and it'll keep sort of changing and editing all the colors as I change it. And it's just a really I'll spend a lot of time just like mucking around with this and kind of getting all these like super cool neon effects. And you can see that it renders all of the kind of the different layers behind it. So it's just a really cool way to use the blend tool in Photoshop, in Illustrator. I can also go into that and make that a little bit smaller if I want to, and that's going to give it even more of that kind of like appearing out of the kind of the blue effect. Oh, yeah. So it's just a really nice...
That real like 80s cinematic effect when you have it kind of coming up from the bottom. Yeah.
Think of like, the Superman titles where that type just comes like right up at the front.
Yeah.
There is a way, I've heard of a way... I've never tested this myself, and I'm not sure. I definitely can't show you guys how to do it right now, but there is a way to make that path that it blends on into a curve, so you can get that kind of like a swooping down and then back up effect.
That's like when you beat Solitaire on PC, and it's
yeah, totally. All the cards like come out and kind of bounce out at you.
Yeah.
That's definitely that effect that we could kind of look at. So again, there's a bunch of different things that we could do here that will make it like super interesting for us to look at. So what I could do as well is I could take this text and place that on an angle if I wanted to. No? Why don't you like me today? There we go. So I could do something like that. And then again, I'm going to take this guy, not all of them, and duplicate that down. So literally just drag it into a new layer, and then do the whole thing again. And that's just like, yeah, again, it's same principle, but just a lot of different ways that we can kind of edit this and mess around with trying to get something looking really, really cool. So move this guy, not that one, sorry. We've got to remember to lock all these things all the time, otherwise it'll select a lot of different things.
Just a shout out as well to anyone that might be watching on another platform, because I know that we're out on Periscope at the moment today as well, and also YouTube. If you want to join the chat, you can come over to behance.net/live. Join us in chat, say hi. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. So again, like you can see, like this is for me, like fan of the 80s and like neon gradients and all this kind of, like, this is just like I'm in heaven when I'm doing this kind of stuff, and I could spend hours doing this.
On like a wetsuit for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
This is on like a wetsuit with like a boogie board under the arm for sure.
What you'll notice as well when you do this is
Oops, my audio was down really low. My bad.
You can see that it's doing all those different versions, right? Like you can see that the more steps I create, the less that's going to be, but it's also going to really chug my computer down quite a bit. So I want to kind of strike a good balance in between doing that and not doing that. So we're going to close this for now, because what I'm actually going to use is a different version of, and I can close this as well. And I'm going to swap back into here, and I've just done this one. So this one's nice and kind of even on both sides. So again, just going to go ahead and redo those last few steps. Whether or not you give it a gradient, a stroke as well is up to you. Obviously, whatever stroke happens is what your color or your gradient is what you're going to see. So you got to be mindful of that a little bit. So I'm just going to pop this straight down, and I'm going to reduce the size of it a little bit. And then that's going to sit nicely on top of my geisha, and it's going to kind of, the perspective will be a little bit more realistic in that sense. I'm going to select both of those, do my blend tool, and it's already remembered all the settings in there. And now what I'm ready to do is I'm pretty much ready to export this. But I'm going to have to make a few concessions here. So if I try and export this guy, my blend, as a layered PSD, it's going to take the 350 steps that I've done and try and put them all on separate layers. And that's just going to like burn my computer alive. So I'm not going to do that. But I can definitely keep it this particular gradient. I can keep that a little bit more alive and just kind of play with that a little bit later on. But I'm definitely going to want to keep this layer, that layer, and that layer as separate Photoshop entities. So let's go ahead and do that right now, where I'm going to hide all of these guys. And I might just quickly jump into here, select this one, and just change the color of the fill to a random color, just so that I can see that. Now you'll notice that hasn't changed my gradient because my stroke is still black. And I can just increase the size of that a little bit so that we've still got that kind of, that nice black effect throughout. And that's looking a little bit kind of 70s, like blaxploitation kind of vibe to it a little bit. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to go to File, Export, Export As, and this is going to allow me to save this as a PSD. In fact, I don't need to do that just yet with this one, because I'm going to export him in straight up. I need to do that with the other ones. So hang on, let me jump back into Illustrator. Sorry for the minimizing effect. I'm trying to remember not to do that. And then we're going to open this up in Photoshop. 300 dpi RGB, that's all good. So that's going to rasterize a file. Depending on how big your thing is, it'll probably take a little bit of time. The reason we didn't save this one as a PSD, it's a little bit of a shame because it means that we don't necessarily have full control over it later on in Photoshop. But it would just take forever. Like we'd be sitting here for the next like 20 minutes while the computer renders the 350 layers that I created for it. So yeah, not super kind of smart to try and pull that off right now. So I'm going to stick that there. And then I'm going to go back into, whoops, sorry, don't do that. I'm going to go back into Illustrator and I'm going to hide that layer and turn these guys on. So these guys are nice and lined up on top. And now what I can do is I can export that as a layered PSD. So I'm going to go down here, go to Photoshop PSD, give it a different name just for sake of clarity. I'm going to call it AAA. Not that that's super clear, but you get the idea. Export. And we want to write layers at 300 dpi because that's our image, RGB, max editability, yep, and then hit OK. Now that's going to take a sec to process, but it's going to be way faster than if I had that mesh layer turned on. I keep doing that, sorry guys. Sorry for the little effect every time. And now we've got this dude over here, so we can open that up in Photoshop. And what you can see is I've got all of my letters have been rendered on a separate layer on their own, so that's kind of cool. My bevel effects are on a separate layer of their own. Like I said, I could have rendered the blue and the pink on separate layers, but it wouldn't help me too much more than what it's already going to do. And I've got my tech lines on there as well. So I'm going to grab all of these, group them, copy that group, and smash it into my file here. And then go and stick that on top of that. And then do a little bit of alignment work, which actually, this is like the Fonz looking in the mirror. It's like, it's fine. I don't need to do anything. So yeah, so now we've got our type nice and clean. I probably don't really need all these guys to be on separate layers, so I'm going to smash them all together, and I'm going to drag that one into my group and call this one type. And now I'm also going to want to show that background. So we can see kind of how the colors are going to work here and how all that's going to come together. Okay. So first thing I want to do is I want to apply, I'm going to hide my tech lines and my bevel, and I can actually see now that that hasn't lined up perfectly. So I'm just going to bump that up over a little bit, and we should be good. So I'm going to take these guys and I'm going to separate them because I'm going to put a gradient overlay on top of them. And if I put that, it's going to put them across both, but I need them to be separate. So I'm going to take that, Command X, Command Shift V, paste in place, and those two are now separate. And I need to be a good boy and rename these. There we go. A little bit of a mistype, but no matter. And now all I need to do is go into that, double click, and go to Gradient Overlay. And you can see I've got this one already prepped. This is my super rad 80s neon pink gradient overlay.
It's like if Jeremy Lord was a gradient, that's it.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. What's not to like about these? It's glorious, it's fantastic. Cool. But I can edit this as much as I want as well. So I've saved that gradient overlay, but if I want it to be like that chrome effect, for instance, we can do that. That's upside down. But you get what I'm saying. It's all just kind of, it's all there. I like this one simply because it's just a little bit more even. Let's make this a nice kind of clean 90 degrees. Go back into that. But you can edit this as well. So if I want one of my colors to be a different color, I can double click on that and pick out like a yellow, and that's going to do something quite interesting with that. So let's cancel that because I don't want that to happen. We can change where all the gradient things go in. So again, there's a whole range of different things that we can do here.
I mean, I was getting a California, what is it, California Games kind of vibe. Do you remember that game?
Yeah.
That's the vibe I was getting with when you threw that yellow in.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of like that yellow a little bit in there. It was kind of cool, but yeah. Again, there's hours and hours and hours that we could kind of play around with here and see how it all kind of fits in. It works quite well with the bottom one there, but we're going to keep it that kind of metallic cyberpunk vibe. And then all I need to do is grab that effect that I've already applied and just command drag onto my geisha layer. So if I hadn't separated those two layers, that gradient would be in the middle of the two words. It wouldn't have the same kind of impact. So that's already looking pretty like retro synth wavy kind of vibe to it.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy with all that looks. Again, if I wanted to, I could go into this guy and say, let's change the color of that gradient. We'll wait till we have the colors of the geisha to decide what color that's going to be. But at this stage, I'm pretty kind of pleased about how that's turned out.
That's awesome.
I'm going to put a little bit of a bevel effect on this as well. So I could have done this in Illustrator, but I'm a little bit lazy. So I'm just going to do that straight up in Photoshop. And this is what I would have done to the outside if I could have been bothered to do it. But this is going to give me a little bit more control what I did later on. But you can do this thing where we're going to do pillow emboss, and we're going to do a little bit more depth, and we're going to change the direction of the light to do this. And my highlight is going to need to be on normal, and it's going to need to be a little bit darker, and the shadow can be on multiply. No, let's put that on normal as well. And that's not too bad. So it's just getting that little bit of...
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd take an opportunity, but yeah, in about 7 minutes, we're going to have like a very short break, kind of Q&A time. So get your questions in while they come through. Someone else in chat was sort of Hichan was asking, are you going to make the letters glow, like the typography glow? And you know, knowing Jeremy, I think there's going to be some glows happening at some point. So.
Yeah. It's not going to be neon glow. Like I'm not going to put neons in here because this is all metallic. But there's definitely going to be some lens flares and some shines involved, and that's what I'm going to do right now. Actually,
there you go.
Yeah. So let's save that. And so again, I've just done this little like bevel effect to these tech lines just to make them look a little bit more kind of like they're actually indented into the metal. And we can do that. We can do that kind of chisel a little bit. That's going to be a little bit better, and decrease the depth of that a little bit more. Size down. Yeah, that's all good. That's a little bit better. That's got that kind of nice pull effect to it. And now I'm going to take these guys. So on my bevel layer, now I'm going to swap these over to a different layer. So I'm going to select all of this, right click, similar, Command X, Command Shift V, and that's going to place them back. So I've got my blue ones and my pink ones on a separate layer. Again, I could have done this in Illustrator, but it's not a huge deal to just do it straight into Photoshop. So I'm going to hide the pink ones because I'm just going to work to that. And I'm going to take this, maybe this blue from here, because again, it's going to be the same material, just this is the kind of the chiseled side effect a little bit. And I'm going to lock my alpha on this. And that is done by just / or pressing that little kind of chessboard button up here. And I'm going to fill that with the blue that I just eyedropped. And then I'm going to do the same thing to this one. There we go. So they're all the same color now, but they're on nice, clean, different layers for me to use. And now I'm going to go in and eyedrop a really nice solid dark blue, and probably even go a little bit darker than that, to be honest. And then on the flip side, we've got our white. Cool. So now what I can do is these are all on their own layers. I can come in and throw some gradients on here. So I'm going to use some, I'm going to put in a dark blue over here. So this is going to be all kind of mishmash of different things. And there's no real kind of rhyme or reason here, except for the fact that you want to kind of think about the light coming up from here. So like in this direction is going to catch the light on the corners. The light will condense onto the corner. So you can kind of maybe start to see what I'm doing here with this, and how that's all going to kind of come together and give it that kind of metallic chiseled effect. So yeah, again, this is potentially going to take a little bit of time doing all of this, but it's definitely going to be worth it in the end, because it's going to give me that really cool kind of 80s chiseled effect. You'll notice as well that as I'm doing this, because I've got all these on separate layers, if I do a really big gradient down here, it'll affect the shapes behind it, around it. So I can also just go in and select that roughly, and then only limit it to the other one, so it only kind of does that one. And I'll probably have to do that a bunch of times because they're getting quite close together now. But again, really starting to get that kind of metallic edge vibe on all of these. And so I probably won't have time to do all of this, but again, we can just do it to one letter and you'll kind of see how that all comes together a little bit. So now I'm switching to the other one, and we can continue doing that same effect. So getting nice and clean, get some nice big broad sides here where the light's catching, and again, down here. So you can see how that's going to be important for me to have these on different layers, so I can get that nice clean cut down here of where the angle of that chisel is going to be. If I didn't do that, then I'd have to make the selections in Photoshop, and it just takes a little bit extra time, and it's just, it's definitely doable, but it's going to be a little bit more kind of painstaking to try and get that going that way.
You can really notice the difference between like the detail just on that A compared to the others. Like when you look side by side, there's a lot of little changes that you've done there, but just looking at them side by side, if you didn't show us the A, I would have thought it was kind of done. Like it looks great. But then actually when you compare them, you can really see that the extra added like depth, and it almost seems to add a bit of texture, adding that gradient to the edge as well. Like it's tricking my mind to think there's some texture there as well.
For sure. And then it's like, it just gives it that nice, like cool, like VHS metallic effect that we're going for. And then this is where we can come in and start to really mess around with making this really like flary and effecty. So we're going to take our gradient here and just do this, and that's going to come off of that, but we're going to smash this down a little bit to here, just so that that's shining so much, it's just catching the light and there's a little bit of a glare coming off of it. And that, again, this really kind of makes the whole thing come to life a little bit more.
Yeah.
So again, this is quite sort of laborious work. There's a lot of detail that needs to go into this, and a lot of effects that need to come in. But theoretically, I would do this on the rest of the type, but again, it's going to take me a while to get through all of that in the time that we've got. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do it to the A.
Cool.
But again, you get the gist of what's happening here.
That's good. Good that you mentioned timing, because no rush at all. But our timer is almost at zero for Q&A break as well. So it's up to you. We can go for a little bit longer, of course. We got all the time, but if you want to, I'm happy to do some questions. Yeah, I thought I'd kick it off. So yeah, chat, just dump your questions in chat on Behance. If you're watching this on another platform, jump over to Behance, and then you can ask your questions, interact. But I thought I might start by asking if we could see maybe one or two other examples of your work, of your type work, that we could have a look at.
Oh.
Over on the gram or wherever else you want to take us.
All right.
Because the idea came up before about, you know, the difference between like a font and like creating a font and creating like custom type for an artwork.
Yeah.
I think it would be really interesting to see some of your other examples.
Right. So then what we've got here is just a bunch of different things. So things like this is obviously, that's a typeface. It's a super awesome typeface, which I'm really struggling to find, actually. If anybody can point me in the right direction of this one. It's a typeface called Raglan Punch. And it's a Japanese typeface, but it's something that I really like to work with. I just take these from the website and just kind of paste them in here, but I don't actually have the font. So that's just straight up font. Other things like this, for instance, this is a font called Gotham, and I've just added some kind of like glitchy effects to it. Again, this is all done in Illustrator. Just to give it that really kind of
cool
vibe that I'm looking for. So that, again, I'm by no means am I a type designer or am I even a typographer. It's just every now and then I'll kind of dabble a little bit in sort of playing around with these different effects. Here we've got something similar. I'm using that same gradient that I created before, trying to get something like really, really 80s. This one is just a typeface that I've downloaded online. That's not really kind of counting as type work, but still something that can be quite interesting to kind of mess around with. But every now and then I'll do, if I jump into my Finder here, I can show you guys something that I did a little while ago. This is not something that I do very often anymore, but this is a piece of type that was created in Illustrator using gradient mesh and different gradient tools.
Right.
So that's all just kind of created. All the shines and everything are created in Illustrator, and then I take that. I don't know if it's showing or not. It's kind of not. So this is all just done with the pen tool and various kind of gradient mesh,
right,
and trying to get that kind of jelly effect. So I've got a gradient mesh running along the line here. So it's kind of doing this different flavors of jelly as the kind of the thing progresses. And then I take that into Photoshop to create something like this. So this is like old version of me from back in the days where I used to kind of do slightly different things.
Right.
And we can talk about that in a second, actually. We were talking about this yesterday with this idea of style and kind of, you know, having too much stuff on your menu and it being kind of confusing for a lot of people. So yeah, this is a massive file, but that's basically the gist of what we've done here. Is we've just added in some effects in Photoshop, added in various kind of things and made it all kind of shiny and a little bit kind of bubbly inside to look like it's made of jam a little bit, or jelly for all you Americans. So yeah, these are just some kind of various examples of that, but I've always had a bit of an interest in type, and you can see that probably a little bit more if you go into my sketchbook. You can see me, in my older stuff, there's things like this where I'm starting to play around with different kind of textured type. And again, that's half Photoshop, half Illustrator. And that's me kind of, this is an interesting example for that question before of like, do you do your sketches by hand first or digital? Here's a good example of using a brush pen to get that effect that you would have to actually draw if you were doing it by hand. Whereas if you're using the right tool, then you get something a little bit more, a little bit cleaner. So here's the kind of the step-by-step process of how that all kind of comes into play. So sketch, a little bit more digital line work, and then kind of playing around with colors. Yeah. Same thing here. This is all just analog. So these are all just examples of different type. Again, like by no means do I claim to be a type designer. There are people out there who are like a million light years ahead of me in that domain. But again, it's just something that I like to mess around with a little bit. But while we're here, this is my old website.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday, weren't we? I think I might have brought it up because I find it very interesting, and it's great that you keep you keep this other website up. So just to put in context, yesterday we were chatting a little bit about finding style, and Amanda, I noticed that you asked a question about this. So hopefully this will help answer that question, about sort of being able to do lots of things and having a very wide breadth portfolio, showing, hey, I could do anything, the Swiss Army knife sort of style, compared to like showcasing sort of the work that you want to do and the work that you're mostly proud of and all that sort of stuff. So this might help answer that question. Well, Jeremy will help answer it much better than I can.
Yeah. So this was my website back in the days. I keep it up. It's not a live thing. There's no buttons from my actual website to take you there. But what I like to do is just kind of compare my current work, to something like this, where there's a bit of watercolor, there's a bit of digital painting, there's some type, there's some vector work, there's some packaging. There's a whole range of different things here. And it's not that I think that any of these works are not good enough, but it's just this page is incredibly confusing for a client. And it took me a little while to realize that was the case. This is what we were talking about yesterday. We were talking about a menu. This here is my current one. So it's like neon, it's 80s. This is very, very, a little bit more focused. So this is basically like, I do only pizza, right? And every now and then I might have like a Nutella pizza. It's like a dessert pizza, but it's still all pizza. So when you look at my menu here, you know exactly what you're going to get. And if you feel like pizza, you're much more likely to come to me than this guy who's got a bit of pizza, a little bit of sushi, a little bit of salads, a bit of burgers, and it's all just kind of like, oh, I thought I knew what I wanted, but now I kind of don't anymore. And I'm sure you guys kind of have that feeling, where it's like you look at a menu and it's so long that you're like, I don't know what I want anymore. The other thing with that, the other really kind of like backlash of that is, this is very confusing for a client, but it's also, you know what, you've got a little bit of type in here, but we want a type brief. We're probably not going to come to you. We're going to go to the person like Gemma O'Brien or Jess Cruikshank or whoever, somebody who does only that. Because obviously the thought is, if that's what you specialize in, you're going to be better than the person who does a little bit of everything, right? So like, if you want the choicest cut of meat, you're going to go to the place that serves only that and that specializes that. You're not necessarily going to go to like Woolies or Coles or whatever and buy meat from them. You'll go to the place that specializes in that. So the problem with doing something like this is, it's confusing for your clients, and it doesn't mean that like you're going to miss out. It does mean that you're going to miss out on a lot of briefs, which is ironic, because a lot of my students have this approach of like scattergun, because they have this thing, right. And I used to have this thing when I did this, where it's like, oh, but I need to showcase some type, so that if there's a type brief, it'll come to me, and I need to showcase some digital painting, so that when there's a digital painting brief, it'll come to me, and so on and so forth. When in fact, the reality is, when there's a type brief, it goes to the person who only does type. When there's a digital painting brief, it only goes to the person who does only digital type painting. So having this is, on my end, a lot more useful for me, because it just gives me a little bit more clarity as to what I'm going to be doing. And it gives my clients a little bit more clarity on what they should be briefing me on. And it holds true as well in the kind of jobs that I've been getting. Like, here, I'm just an illustrator. I'm just a person who can draw when they can't. And so you ended up getting a lot of briefs that I didn't enjoy, and that I was like, oh, why am I doing this? It's like, right. Well, because you just draw. Whereas now with this kind of stuff, I'm getting a lot more kind of focused briefs, and briefs that are asking me to do cyberpunk stuff or manga stuff or skateboarding, neon 80s stuff. And it's like, yes, this is awesome. I love all these briefs. Yeah. But it's because on my menu, that's all that exists. So nobody's walking into my pizza shop and seeing that there's only pizza on the menu and asking for a soup.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I love it. I love hearing you talk about that journey. Just a quick shout out.
If you look at my
Alex Lahore in the chat as well. Alex, a very talented illustrator who I met through you.
Yeah.
Um,
He's been teaching me mural work actually as well. So I'm trying to expand into
that's
mural
awesome.
stuff as well, and he's been teaching me some of that stuff as well. So hello to you, Sensei.
Good on you, Alex.
Um,
I love how we learn from
yeah.
each other. You have another question, or did you? Or you got more? You got more.
No, it's just basically just kind of looking at my Instagram. So
Yeah.
Instagram is Jeremy Lord underscore,
Cool.
and you can see the same thing happening here, where it's sort of heavily curated towards the kind of briefs that I want to get,
Yeah.
and the kind of work that I want to do. So it's all about kind of being a little bit clear. Hey, we got a live stream here with Alex and myself. Good
Mm.
old days. Yeah, so that's basically kind of that. Hopefully answers that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So Tyson was asking, more related back to what you're showing us today.
Mhm.
If you were to enlarge the artwork to, like, say, a billboard size, would upscaling be a problem?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I am working in Photoshop.
Yep.
And we spoke about this at the very beginning of yesterday's session. I have to be mindful of the size that I create my documents at. And in this case, I started with an A3, but I've gone a little bit over that now.
Mm.
But that's only ever how big I'm going to be able to print this. If I was going to like double the size, if I dropped it down to 150, it might still be okay. Like the
Mm.
bigger the file, obviously, you're not meant to be like super close to it, like you would with an A3 print. If there's resolution issues on an A3 print, you'll notice it. Whereas if you're printing like a 3 by 4 meter billboard, you're not meant to be like super close to it. So generally those kind of things don't occur. But we were talking about Alex before. Alex works all in vector, so that's not an issue that he needs to contend with because it's all vector. It doesn't matter what size you create it at. You can always upscale it or downscale it without any resolution loss. Because I tend to work with a lot more kind of effects and try and sort of manipulate the pixels a little bit more,
Yeah.
I need to be quite conscious of that. So I do often end up with massive files because I'm working at A2 or A1 even, just in case I produce something that's really awesome and I'm like, oh yeah, I would like actually to do a really big print of that. If I've started an A3, I can't do that. So it's just one of those little concessions that I'm willing to make, but yeah, is a little bit of a downside of working in Photoshop versus working in Illustrator for sure.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. And one more question. His sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Drew his first picture yesterday in many years, and it's a rough copy of one of your works. Wondering if you would take a look at it maybe after the stream at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I always love doing that kind of stuff, and it's just like it's super flattering as well to kind of see that people sort of um, taking inspiration from the work that you're creating.
Mm.
And there's definitely a lot to be learned. We talked about sort of the learning curve of tracing yesterday as well, of copying other people's
Exactly.
work,
Yeah.
and how you can learn kind of the tips and tricks of how they do their stuff, and it might give you some inkling
Mm.
as to how you can take that and kind of like make it your own as well. So yeah, I'd love to actually take a look at that work and give it some feedback for sure.
Cool. That's awesome. Probably Instagram or something is the best way to reach out to you.
Yeah, if you
Something like
if
that.
you DM me through Instagram, I can have a look at it through there for sure.
Yeah, nice. Very good. Great questions, everyone. Keep them coming in. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for that.
Jeremy's very good at
So I've
answering the
added,
question and then answering like the other questions that might come up around that. So I really love like hearing about your journey and everything, because you've got that teacher inside of you that, you can't help but say, yeah, just importantly, you kind of like qualify your answer as well, which is always learn something new when you tell your story.
Oh, thanks, man. No, it's my pleasure. I think it's important to do these things as well and like give back to the community. Like what you give always kind of comes back to you. And it's one of the things that we were talking about. Alex kind of showing me the ropes in terms of doing a lot of mural work, and also Jesse Wright has been showing me a few things as well. It's just like, yeah, what goes around comes around. So it's always really good to support the community out there, and if we all kind of do that, then the community grows as a whole, and
Totally.
that's beneficial for everybody. Everybody wins.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So I've added a few little kind of flares that I prepared earlier. Some cool little, like, again, we were talking about like the Michael Bay lens flare and all that kind of stuff. So obviously all these kind of metallic effects, sorry, would go across all the other letters as well. But that's going to be a job for another day for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what I can do also is, again, depending on how 80s I want that work to be. So I've got this flare is just on a separate file, but I've also got these guys that can come in and give me a little, even more kind of that rough 80s print look. And so you can see that's kind of gone in there. What I've got is this like grungy effect, like it's like that retro kind of bad print look that can go on this, and just give it a little bit of kind of grain. That's always something kind of fun to work with. And then something like this as well is just going to give it, again, it's like a little bit of that kind of old battered VHS kind of box look, if you want. That's probably a little bit too obvious now, but just a little bit of subtlety in it, just to give it that little bit of like, oh yeah, this is old. It looks a little bit kind of retro. So all those are just like textures and files that I've created earlier that I can just kind of drop into various files, just to give it that little bit of extra 80s flavor. And again, it depends. Like I might decide I don't want any of that, depending on the colors that I bring in a little bit later on my geisha. But yeah, you get the gist of how that type is all going to kind of look. All these gradients can come back in and change later on as well. If I decide that I want a different gradient on there, I can do all that kind of stuff. So all this is yeah, just same steps that I've just kind of shown, just repeated a bunch of different times over and over. But let's get back into our geisha here. So she's probably going to have to move down a little bit, but there's not heaps of room. So I'm actually going to stretch my canvas. So I'm using the crop tool here, and I'm just going to crop out of my image rather than into it, just to increase the size of that image a little bit more. Now, bear in mind, I'm just changing the dimensions of my canvas, not actually changing the actual pixels in my canvas. So I'm not going to lose any resolution doing this. I'm just adding more to the background of that image. So it's all good for me to kind of do that without, whoops, sorry, what's going on? Do I have any locked layers in here? Why is that happening? That's interesting. I need to rasterize the type style on that. So I'm just going to merge these back together, and probably do the same thing with this. This is very destructive, what I'm doing. This is kind of a destructive workflow. But if I'm pretty happy with how the type is looking at this stage, I can safely do that. It just means that now I won't be able to go back and change the gradients or the bevel effect, because it's all been smashed into one layer. But because I had it on a gradient effect, it was locked to that location. So if I move the layer, it doesn't move the gradient effect with it. So it's all a little bit kind of wonky in that way. But yeah.
Could you have extended the canvas down and then moved the geisha down?
I could do, but I'm not that smart.
You don't need to. I just thought.
Well, I could have done that for sure. But again, at this stage, I'm pretty happy with how all that's going to kind of come together.
Nice.
So I don't necessarily need to do that too much. But yeah, let's start putting in some into the geisha herself. And again, we started doing that a little bit earlier, and I can't remember where it went, but it doesn't matter. So first things first is I'm going to kind of work backwards here in terms of what's further away from me in the image gets the first layer. So the face in this instance is the thing that's going to be behind everything else. There's not much that's in front of the face in terms of color. So that's going to be the first one. So I'm going to go with like just a kind of a off-whitey pink, just to get that kind of like pale geisha face going. And here I can get really kind of rough with the edges behind the hair, because there's going to be a hair layer that's going to go on the front of that. But I just need to be a little bit more careful about where the jawline goes. So that's my selection. And then I can option delete, and that's going to fill that with my selection. And then let's call that face and make a new layer, call this hair. How are we going for time?
So I've just started the next timer. So it's 11 past 10 at the moment. So we've probably got about like 43 minutes at the moment.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So
good time. I'll let you know when we're 20 minutes as well. I think that was a time for us to be aware of.
So cool. So we've got that now. We're going to do the hair in that color. There's different ways I can do this. I can just paint if I want to. And I could also, if I wanted to, turn the symmetry back on again. And so that when I paint, it paints on both sides. But because I've edited the drawing a little bit so that's not exactly the same, especially on the hair on both sides, it uses that more natural feeling. I'm going to have to go in and just do it the old school way and not do the symmetry thing. But yeah, I can either do it with the lasso tool, as I'm doing now, or I could just go straight in with a paintbrush and just fill that in.
This that is where way. Those thick lines come in really handy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where that kind of, the thicker the line, the more margin for error I have in that kind of painting. So yeah, it's part of how I like to work. I like to work with nice, clean, smooth lines. But it's also it's handy to do that because it just gives me a little bit more leeway. And I'm using this color palette here of 6. So we're talking about color a little bit before. I generally use this rule of thumb of try and stick to 6 colors, or at least to begin with, stick to 6 colors. It is insanely unlikely that I will stay with 6 colors by the end of this. But having that kind of opportunity to be able to just start small, start with only a few, so that you're not just like losing your mind before you've even kind of gotten into the meat of all this, is really crucial. If you start with like, I'm going to do this and there's going to be colors everywhere, it's going to be very tricky to balance all those colors and get them all right. Like start simple first, and then we can kind of look at like adding colors and tweaking them as we need. Like I've just made the background a little bit darker, just so that the hair can stick out of the background a bit. And that's what I mean. Like I hadn't planned for this particular shade of blue, but because I've now done the hair, I can sort of boost that contrast in between the hair and the background a little bit more by tweaking that color. And that's just to command you to bring in the hue sat. I live here basically when I'm working with color. Like I spend the bulk of my time with this menu, just kind of tweaking and seeing kind of what works. So having a color plan is good, but also feel free to like not stick to that color plan if you feel like that's not working out for you. But yeah, so again, just moving on with a whole bunch of different colors and kind of filling in now. It's mostly just a kind of like a paint by number exercise for me at this stage.
There was a question about your color palette, where they can download it, but you create your own color palettes, don't you?
I do, yeah. So I have used Adobe Cooler in the past just to do a few different things, which is now just embedded straight into Illustrator and Photoshop. But I make my own color palettes, and I'm happy to share these if people want. I'm happy to drop these in somewhere. But what that looks like is here. So these are my color swatches that I use, and you can see that a lot of them are pretty similar. Like I like to work with a lot of similar kind of neon blues and pinks and kind of highlights and all that kind of jazz. So I'm happy to put this up for you guys as well. I don't know how I would do that. Would I send this to you and you can put a link in the chat?
You can send it to me. I can maybe after if you guys go to
Yep.
the YouTube.
Yep.
So if you go check this out on YouTube, this is the Asia Pacific Adobe YouTube page, by the way, and just go down into the comments. We'll get it up there like an hour after the stream or something like that. So if anyone's interested in that, that's very generous of you, Jeremy. Thank you very much. So if you're watching this
No
on
problem at all.
demand, have a look down the bottom.
And what you'll see here from these colors is that there tends to be this thing where I try and use 60-30-10. So 60-30-10 is this rule where 60% of your palette is one particular side of the color wheel. So in this one up here, for instance, we've got lots of different shades of blue. And then we've got 30, which is, this one's a little bit different, but basically you want to do 60% of one color, 30% of another color, and then 10% of a complementary color. So for instance, if we're using something like this down here, we've got blue and purple kind of on the same side, and then a pink, which kind of matches up to the blues and the purples. And then we've got, on the flip side, we've got this yellow that really boosts that. So it's good to just bring in a little bit of kind of like mustard in your color, just something to pick it up a little bit more, and see how that can work. So again, that's the theory. That's generally what I would start with. But it very quickly goes a little bit more freeform as I go. So what I might do here is I might skip ahead and just bring in, again, all these colors that I prepared earlier. So again, this is just me repeating the process that I did before and just spending a little bit more time on it. So I'm pretty happy with how these colors are working with my type up here. There's some interesting things going on. I'm quite happy with how all that's looking. So we're going to kind of stick to that for now. We'll hide these sketches. Thanks, man. And again, that, you can kind of mess around with different colors here and see, what happens if I take, for instance, I got all these yellows. If I start to kind of mess around with that, like something like this is just, there's not enough contrast there, right? There's too much pink going on. We need something to boost a little bit more. So the yellow kind of comes in nicely for that. The green is cool as well, but like yellow and purple is, it's a nice kind of combination of colors. It's also Lakers as well a little bit. Who doesn't love the Lakers? Oh, yeah. So I'm just going to stick with that. I've got this triangle in the background that I created earlier as well. And so that's just a vector shape as well that I brought in from Illustrator. And I'm going to put a bit of a neon effect to this. And this is going to be my light source, right? So it's going to be kind of backlit. And I'm going to put literally just an outer glow on that. And I'm going to make it a pink. So pink outer glow. We've got that nice lightsaber kind of vibe to it. You can almost hear the hum. Mm-hmm. And we're going to make that glow nicely. I'll keep it on linear dodge. You can, if you want to, keep it on normal as well. That works too. Linear dodge just tends to work a little bit better with more colors, but sometimes I'll switch back to normal. In this case, I think that's one of those times where the normal blend mode seems to be a little bit more appropriate with that particular color. We're going to make that glow really stand out. And I'm going to also add an inner glow to it. So the inner glow is always going to be white. And we're going to just decrease the size of that till we get something that looks nice and kind of neon look. Again, it's that kind of like lightsaber vibe that we're trying to get. Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's cool. I like that you said you can kind of hear the sound, because as you were doing all the Onagaisha stuff, I could just constantly hear the, like, when you go to the movies and it's Dolby surround sound or THC or something, it's like, that's all I could hear for like 20 minutes while you're doing that. It's cool.
I'm going to give that background a little bit of a glow as well. So that's the neon light kind of hitting the wall behind her.
Nice.
It's just going to give that a little bit more kind of life as well. I've got that on a separate layer with just a radial gradient, and I can increase and decrease the opacity as I need. So that's probably a bit too much. Just enough so that it kind of sings a little bit more. All right. Um, Next step for us is we're going to add in some shading. Um, and what I like to do is I like to take all the body work that I've done, so all the colors and the outlines, we're going to duplicate all that and then smash them all together, lock the layer, and then fill that with black. So all I've basically done here is a silhouette of my work. That's going to allow me to kind of play around with some nice kind of shading and get all that line work looking nice and deep. But it's also going to allow me to bring some highlights in because the lighting is only going to work if I've got a good sense of shading in here. So I need the shading in order for that light to kind of stand out. You can see immediately what's happened here is I've just dropped it behind and everything just kind of starts to really pop a little bit more. Her visor is really kind of coming to life. And now I can put a layer mask on this and I can start to carve out some lights in here. So the general rule of thumb when you're doing this is you want your neons to stay kind of on the dark side of things. Getting a lot of Star Wars references.
Yeah, Star Wars.
Perfectly fine. But so yeah, basically you want to decide where your light source is coming from. So in this instance, let's say that the light source is coming from the left. So we're going to carve out some shading over here as to like kind of where that light source is hitting her face. And again, same thing would happen in here where that would kind of come in and she'd just kind of catch the light on that side of her face. So yeah, there's a fair bit of kind of time that can go into something like this and trying to sort of figure out the kind of the 3D aspect of things and how does it kind of all work. But the advantage of doing it this way is that it's literally just a layer mask waiting for color to appear behind it.
Yeah.
So it's quite a fun way to work in carving out all those kind of highlights and trying to figure out where the light is hitting. And immediately you can see that it just gives her so much more kind of life and volume, and it just gives it much more presence. But it's also going to be really handy for me to create my neons and bring those in to really make all that kind of pop. And
it's such a fun way to, seems like a very cathartic thing to do. Like you kind of lose yourself doing this for a couple of hours, like just
100%
these shapes.
Yeah. Like if we had like another 3 hours, I would happily be just sitting here doing this.
Johanna wants to know if you ever make your own sound effects while you're doing this sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, hell yeah. I'm
definitely
struggling really hard to keep it under wraps. It's like normally what I would do as well when I'm kind of like drawing something like this is I would have my synthwave playlist kind of like blaring to things like Starcadian or Robert Parker, any of those like really awesome synthwave artists. But sometimes as well, like I'm not gonna lie, I will listen to like movie soundtracks. Like I'll put like Blade Runner soundtrack on and draw this kind of stuff, like, just to like just get me more in the mood and get that kind of vibe going.
Is there a Cyberpunk like playlist out yet? You'd probably be all over that if that's out yet.
Well, Cyberpunk playlist
Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah, there probably is. I haven't actually looked into that, to be honest, but to be fair, I would have to assume that it would just be like a bunch of synthwave, really.
Stuff you may have probably heard before, right? Like the pretty popular kind of stuff.
Along those lines for sure, I think is what I would be kind of getting into. But yeah, it just helps kind of with that, like getting in the mood, I guess, like getting in that kind of vibe of here's what I'm doing and that's how I'm doing it. But yeah, definitely, like I think that's a good question to ask. I would be making kind of like swooshy sound effects and trying to like really kind of feel what I'm doing a little bit, which sounds incredibly dorky and geeky, but that's cool. I can live with being a geek.
We all are. Well, I am. That's for sure. And you got a cat, so you can talk to your cat as well, which is always fun.
Yeah, she's not super friendly though, so
No.
mostly just me talking to myself. All right, so we're gonna leave it at that. I would normally probably try and get a little bit more, like a little bit of stuff happening on here to get that kind of neon bounce, but we're just gonna stick to that. And now what I'm going to do is, this is the bit that I love the most whenever I'm kind of doing this, is this is the bit where I can throw in my mustard and that just kind of little bit of, yeah, this is the blue cheese dip. This is the whatever you're into, spicy sauce or whatever. This is the bit where it just kind of like all really kind of starts to come together. So we've got the neon in the back is pink. So you know what? I am actually going to change that to blue because I want to bring in a blue highlight because we've already got so much pink in here. So I'm going to pop an adjustment layer on this and I'm going to lock it to the layer immediately underneath it. And I'm just going to change that to a blue. It's not liking me today. All right. Blue and blue, please. And then we'll just go to the outer glow and change that to our color that we created. That's better. So yeah, again, it's just a matter of like kind of rebalance all your colors a little bit and seeing how that's going to kind of come to life. But so that now we can use that as a light source, start doing this. And this is, again, where it's just like, that's really going to start to carve out some lights for me and make all that kind of, all the work that I do it exists for this moment where I can start to do this kind of stuff and really like turn on those neons full bore and get into carving some kind of nice shapes out of this. Nice. And you can immediately see that that's really starting to pop a lot more.
Yeah.
And trying to sort of figure out, again, there's a lot of time that goes into me kind of getting every single little detail of this right, like trying to figure out where the light is hitting, how much of it is hitting in that spot. But you can see as well the importance of having shading in here. If I did the blues on this side, that blue on that face color doesn't work at all. It doesn't have the same kind of impact. So you really need that darkness in there to make those neons really pop. If you try and do that with a lighter color, you're just not going to get the same impact and effect. And those lights are just not going to look like they're on as much. It's exactly the same thing as like turning on a flashlight during the day it's not going to cast a lot of light. If you turn that on at like midnight in the middle of like pitch black forest, that's really going to it's going to be super bright. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind if you're doing this kind of stuff, is that, certain things are going to catch the light a lot more, but also you need to do your lighting in the shadows so that you can really make that kind of pop. You need the dark side. It can't just be all light side.
There must be balance.
There must be balance in the Force for sure.
There might be some people in the chat who are interested in kind of learning this sort of stuff. I mean, you do it so naturally because you've been doing it your whole life and trained in all this sort of stuff. Where do you think people should go to kind of learn a little bit more about that, like the shading and the light kind of effect that you have? I know it's very natural to you, but where would you go if you were starting from scratch?
Again, so we had a similar-ish question yesterday. We were talking about life drawing and all that kind of stuff. The main thing is it's one of the nice things about drawing, and it's also one of the really annoying things about drawing, is there's kind of no shortcuts. Like you kind of just have
Right.
to like do pay your dues and get the thing right. But there are definitely resources that would help. So the most obvious and immediate thing I would say is learn sort of your basics of how light hits an object. So if we got a circle and the light's coming from over there, then we're going to get, obviously that's going to catch the most amount of light, and we're going to have a shadow down here. But if this is sitting on a kind of a surface, that light is also going to kind of bounce back in and hit underneath there. So we might also get a little bit more light going there. And that's going to give it a little bit more kind of 3D aspect to it. So little things like that are going to be really important to kind of understand. But otherwise, like we're kind of like looking at the face, for instance, and like doing the lighting on the face. It's just, draw lots of faces and kind of like, see how the light works on a face. Think about all the different volumes of a face. Like her eyeball is underneath here, so obviously that's making the eyelid bulge out, so that's going to catch more light. One of the ways that I like to think about it is as if it was snow. So again, if you've got something like this, like if that's the shape and there's snow falling over here, like that snow is going to pile up massively here. That's going to catch a lot of light.
Right.
There might be a little bit over here, but it might just be a little bit less of a scattering. And then it's going to pile up massively here and then kind of fall off as it goes. So that's how I kind of like to think about it, as is kind of like this 3D shape of like where is, if the snow is like blasting in from here, what's it catching? Like where is the snow piling up? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That helps me kind of figure all that out and get it all right. But at the end of the day, it's really is just kind of studying a lot of these things and like drawing them a bunch of times, really looking at how these things work. And we spoke about this again yesterday. It's like the difference between seeing and looking. When like you're looking at something, I think the analogy that I used was hearing and listening.
Yeah.
Like you can hear your teacher talking in history class, but you're not necessarily listening to them.
Right.
And when they ask you a question, you're like, oh, what? Sorry, I wasn't listening. So seeing and looking is basically the same thing, where looking is like hearing and seeing is like listening. And when you draw something, it really forces you to see that thing and not just look at it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, get that wrong. This is where a lot of people stumble, is this idea that like, oh, I've seen this monument before, I'd be able to draw it. But in fact, like when you start to draw, you're like, oh, wait, how does it look again? That doesn't look like what it normally does. And it's because you've just kind of like, you've literally just looked at it. You haven't really seen it. Drawing something really forces you to like see it properly. And really inspect it. Like, actually, you know what? I thought that was a lot smaller, or that should have been a lot bigger. Like I've always gotten that wrong.
Right.
And drawing something like that really like embeds that into your brain, and you then have that as a library of different things that you can use. And I think that's an important thing as well, which is why a lot of artists, we spoke about this yesterday, a lot of artists like to draw similar things, because it's their style and it's the kind of content they like to draw with, but also it's because it's the thing they feel comfortable drawing. Like a lot of artists will draw skulls a lot, because they know the shape of a skull and it's like it's something that they enjoy doing, but it's definitely something that they feel really comfortable doing as well. I don't know if you guys can hear the bins being taken out behind me.
Yeah, it's bin night. It's bin day here for me as well.
Yeah.
Just letting you know, we've got about, letting you in chat know, we've got about 20 minutes left for us today, and it's been great hanging out with you, Jeremy. It's amazing how far this has come, like just in 2 days. Like, it's been super cool, and that was some great tips as well. For people just getting started, and there was lots of great tips yesterday as well. So thanks everyone for the questions. It's super cool.
Yeah, keep them coming for sure. Like I'm more than happy to, walk and talk at the same time. And I might just start on her visor here, because her visor is still the kind of the one thing that's missing. So I did her visor on a separate layer so that it would kind of stand out from the rest. So what I'm going to do is normally I would have all my colors be in a nice clean layer where I can see all those colors and affect them. But obviously I want my visor needs to be in front of the outlines of the eyes and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to pop a new layer in here and call it visor fill. And I'm going to grab, let's say, this color. It doesn't really matter. I might just group those two together so that I can affect them a little bit later on as well. But I'm going to just start with the blue here and fill that all in. I'm tempted now. We did this yesterday where I started drawing some heart-shaped sunnies on her instead of a visor. And now that looking at this, it's almost like one of those like Dragon Ball scouters. Like it's almost tempting to just leave it on one side, but you know what?
She's over 9,000.
Yeah. Do you know, curiously, actually, about that one, that meme of like it's over 9,000 is a pretty well-known meme. In the actual manga, in the book, it's 8,000.
Oh, so not in the TV show, not in the original TV show.
So in the TV show, it's 9,000, but in the books, it's 8,000.
Oh, that's just power creep.
Deep dumb knowledge. Apparently, what it is, and correct me, anybody, if you guys know this wrong, that this is wrong or not, but I've read somewhere that the animators decided that his mouth looked better if he said 9,000. Like his mouth looked more like he was saying 9 than 8. And so they changed it to 9. Wow. Whereas in the books it's 8,000. So yeah. Cool. So that's actually not bad. But again, here's where I've grouped those so I can actually put a adjustment layer on top of that and just go in and see like, all right, what color visor works best? Quite like that. The pink is good, but again, there's quite a lot of pink already in here. So potentially just leaving it on the kind of that blue that I originally created. And again, you can see why I've done that on top of everything so that it looks like that visor is in front of her face and doing the thing that it's meant to be doing. But what I might also do here is I've got a bunch of assets that I have pre-prepared from other kind of briefs, or I've got a bunch of folders where I keep, a whole bunch of different vector assets or things that I can bring in at a moment's notice if I need to, that I would reuse a lot. Like for instance, this cool like 80s sun, that's something that would feature heavily in my work. I've geeked out and done a Dragon Ball as well. I've even done the stars for the Dragon Ball. I've got a whole bunch of different patterns in here that I can reuse. But what I might do is if we go in here, I should have a cool, that one. That's the one that I want. Yep. So let's get back into here. And I'm going to open this up in Photoshop. And this is just a little bit of like extra fun that I can stick onto her visor to like, cyberpunk the hell out of this. Oh, nice. Stick that on there. And again, like, yeah, it can be really cool. Like once you know kind of what style you like to work with, you can start to really, mess around with different assets and different things that you just have ready-made that you're likely to drop into, a bunch of different illustrations. And that can be really, really helpful in order to save time, but also to, get to where you're going a little bit faster. And it might give you some ideas as well. So I'm just going to warp this as well, just to make it look, oops, sorry.
So is this coming in as vector, or is it?
No, this is a rasterized thing. Right. Yeah. Just so that I can apply this kind of, this bend to it to make it look like it's on there.
Like so it's curved.
And also, yeah, so it's just kind of sitting nicely on that visor
Mm.
is pretty important to kind of get that right. But also, like if again, if we had like heaps of time here, what I would also do is add in some like scan lines to this to give it that kind of like really um, good kind of texture feeling to it
Mm.
of like real like digital kind of cyberpunk look, and that would really make it kind of pop a little bit more. Don't ask me what any of these things says. That one says Cyberpunk 43, but all this is just like matrix text.
Mm.
It doesn't really, it's just there for texture, so it's not really important. But I have been known to slip a little, like, yeah, a bit of a um, effect, a little bit of reference to Dragon Balls, and we were just talking about the 9,000, 8,000 thing. I can sometimes do that as well. Just get rid of this guy down here. He's not really kind of playing nicely with the others.
What's
But
the skull? What's the skull a reference to over to the left?
nothing.
Nothing in
Nothing.
particular.
It's just no. Just sometimes it's a reference, sometimes it's not. I like to kind of keep people guessing a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah. Do you know what? Actually, now that I'm looking at this, I'm not really loving it that much. I think it's a little bit too much, and you can't really see her face under it anymore. So I might just leave it at that, or I might just delete all of this. That's better. Now we can actually see her face underneath it. So there is, obviously there is like, you have gone too far, you must go back.
And were you often?
That
I
is,
noticed that you sort of zoomed out to like the full the full image,
yeah,
I guess, in its entirety, and then kind of went, actually, for some reason, this isn't working for me. Is that often something you
yeah,
need to force yourself to do, like zoom out, or?
100%,
Mm.
100%, because it just like that's how people are going to see the work, right? So if you're zoomed in, it doesn't give you the full extent of what you're looking at. So zooming out is absolutely crucial when you're doing this because it just gives you the full view. A little tip as well, now that I'm thinking about it, for all of you guys out there, sort of asking those questions of like what trying to make my drawing better, trying to get proportions right. Proportions is it's one of the hardest things to get accurate as an artist, especially when you're talking about human proportions, so like drawing hands and faces and stuff. If you're drawing like a tree or something more organic, like trees come in all shapes and sizes, so proportions aren't necessarily going to be crazy um, relevant to that.
Mm.
But on a human, like if you draw the hand even just a fraction too big compared to the face, like everybody's got a hand and a face, they're going to see it immediately. So it's really unforgiving. And there's so many proportions that you can mess up on your kind of trip through that. So one of the ways that you can check for proportions, it won't really do very much on a piece like this, but let's say, for instance, if I go into, let's just jump in here and see something like a little bit more of like a traditional kind of sketch work. This will be fun, actually. This is one of the first drawings that I did in college. And I look at it now and it's like, whoa, this is really terrible. But interestingly, already doing like Japanese stuff. So kind of come full circle there. But what I was going to say
It's a bit
is,
of Dragon Ball anatomy happening.
yeah,
Love it.
yeah, totally. So flipping your canvas immediately shows you where you've gone wrong,
Mm.
because it's basically like you want a fresh view on your work. So when you're drawing your work, you're looking at it, and your eye grows accustomed to the mistakes that you've made and
Mm.
tricks you into thinking that they're all good. So flipping that gives you a new kind of view, and you look at it with a fresh eye, and all of a sudden you can see like, oh, his leg is way too long and his knee is not in the right position and his hand is way too small. Like that's a really like dinky Donald Trump hand. So like definitely you'll see a lot of artists in live stream do lots of this when they're in
Right.
the sketch phase.
Mm.
And that's them just making sure that the proportions are right on their
Mm.
drawing and that everything's fine. Obviously, because mine's symmetrical, that's not going to do anything. But yeah,
Cool. That's a great tip. I love that tip. Um, Yeah, it's like a typography tip as well. You know, flip it upside down to check that your kerning's okay, because
Yeah,
your brain has told you, yeah, I think that's all right. And as soon as you flip it, you can see, oh, actually that gap's too wide. That one's not, you know, not wide
100%.
enough. And then you flip it back over and you're like, oh yeah, that was it. That's great. Different
Yeah,
perspectives, I think, is important in design and in life.
yeah, for sure. A fresh set of eyes on something.
Yeah,
If it can be someone else's, that's great.
yeah,
But if it's got to be your own, then yeah, like trying to get a new look on something is always going to be really good. Or taking a break from that something and coming back to it a little bit later, or working on something else. I usually have like a work in progress folder that's pretty full of different things. So that like it keeps it interesting for me, and it just means that like I don't necessarily get bored working on a piece, because like yes, that can happen for sure. There's kind of like boredom of working on a piece, but it's also just it means that when you come back to the piece that you were working on, you get a little bit more of a fresh look, and it just gives you that sense of proportion a little bit more accurately. So I'm just changing now the color of the highlight, the shading on the geisha word there, just to try and like match it up to the neon a little bit more, and seeing how that looks. But it kind of actually just kind of falls away now a little bit. It's not working in the best way possible. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And that should just be fine. I've also done this thing where we were talking about this yesterday, where I will go in and like add a bunch of different things on separate layers and see like, do the blades go all the way through her hair? Do they stick out on the other end? Or is it better just to leave it like this from a compositional perspective? So yeah, this can lead to a lot of indecision, because it's like, all right, I'm going to spend some time now coloring in these blades and putting some shines on them and stuff. And all that maybe just to realize that I don't like them and it was better without them.
right.
So there is definitely digital invites you to do this kind of stuff, where you can just keep adding and adding and adding on and on and on, and it never ends. But at some point you do need to have that piece finished. So yeah, it's definitely something that you need to balance a little bit. And coming back to things and looking at like, you know what, like what if this was on a bit of an angle like this? How does
Yeah.
that look? That kind of cool. Like I'm quite liking this now, because I've been looking at the other version a little bit too long, and so that's like, hey, yeah, that's cool. Which is another dangerous thing in design or illustration. It's like not all changes are better, even though they might feel like they're better when
Yeah.
you're doing them, because you've been looking at the thing too long. It just like adds a new flavor. It's like, that's great. It's like, it's actually not great. And in this sense, it's kind of cool. It gives it a little bit of volume, but because I'm going for the symmetrical, straight in front view, that's probably going to be a little bit better. But maybe if I give it a little bit more perspective that away, that can give it a sense of like it's really kind of coming up from behind her and doing that. That's not too bad.
That's pretty cool.
I'm digging that a little bit more,
feeling
but yeah.
That's nice.
Might
Will you
leave
end
that
up?
like
We've
that.
got about 5 minutes left. Will you end up posting this somewhere that like we can check?
Yeah, so I'll probably finish this off properly, and I'm quite liking this one. So chances are that this will become a sticker,
Cool.
as in just something like this, for instance. So that's something that I like to do quite a bit, is mess around with this kind of thing, for instance. So I'll put like a little outline on this, just so you can kind of see how that looks, and then just like, hey, cool, that would actually make a pretty cool sticker.
Yeah.
So I might definitely do this as a sticker, and then probably this as a print as well. And I've got my little kind of signature stamp down there as well. So yeah, these will definitely be prints, because I do quite like what's happened here today. So yeah, keep an eye out, and that'll be on Instagram, posting through that. And I've got my online store, which I've been neglecting for quite a while, just because I've been crazy busy. But any prints, any stickers will go in through there. There's a couple in there already. But yeah, it's just one of those things like you start it and then you actually get busy doing the work and then you forget to
Right.
make stuff from the work. Yeah.
We should make a sticker out of every artwork you do with us on Adobe Lightroom. That would be cool.
That would be pretty cool, actually. Yeah. And here's that effect again that's been brought back in now on top of the whole thing, just to get that like a little bit more kind of texture. But again, in this instance, I don't feel like it's necessarily required, so I might just sap that. Yeah. Last thing, actually, before we go, this is probably pretty important. I should mention this. Something that you and I have spoken about a few times, Flynn, is my images are always RGB.
Yeah. Yep.
Because CMYK, like if I'll do a duplicate of this and I can show you guys what I mean. And I'll flatten that just so it's not taking forever. Yeah. You'll notice that the difference in color will be pretty phenomenal in terms of that's CMYK, this is RGB. And you can see that the richness of the colors in the RGB version and the brightness and kind of real neon, those pinks and the blues are really popping, whereas here they're a little bit faded. Simply because RGB has a much wider color range than CMYK. And so there used to be this thing where like most printers, all printers almost used to only work with CMYK, and it's still a little bit of a standard. But there are printers who will work with CMYK RGB printers. And so I get all my work printed through a mate of mine, this guy called Robert Wade, who runs a business called Box Imaging. He prints all of my stuff and he prints it RGB. And so the colors that you see here, my screen is calibrated to his printer. So what I see on my screen is like 99.999% exactly the same thing that comes out on a print.
Wow.
So if you guys are keen to work with these kind of super bright poppy colors, you're going to have to work with RGB, which can be a little bit of an arm wrestle with a lot of clients because you're handing in an RGB file and they're used to working in CMYK. So I do have to explain to them and potentially like get them to print through my printer instead. But yeah, as you saw, CMYK just doesn't really do that justice because it's just a much shorter color range.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. That's great advice. I really like that. And having a good relationship with a printer is very important.
Yeah. Your printer is, as long as you're a digital artist, your printer is your right hand, basically. And like, if you're working with a crap printer and they're not printing your work well, then your work doesn't look good.
Right.
So when you're a painter, whatever comes out only of you, and so you control the quality across the whole board. But when you send over a digital file to a printer, how that print comes out or how that sticker or that T-shirt comes out is entirely dependent on your printer. So if my printer screws up all these colors and they don't come out very rich, or there's graininess or banding or any of that kind of stuff. Banding is when you've got a gradient and you can see like the bands of color. It's not a smooth gradient.
Right.
All that makes your work look terrible. And so it doesn't matter if you're the best artist in the world. If you have a crappy printer, your work is going to look crappy. So yeah, having a good relationship with a printer that you can get along with, who will point out mistakes in your file and not just hit print on whatever you send them, is I can't stress that enough for sure.
That's good advice. You're a fountain of good advice. It's been great having you and hanging out with you again. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's super fun. I always enjoy doing those things, and thanks everybody for the questions as well. And I can't remember whose name it was, but yeah. If you want to DM me your work through Instagram, I'll take a look at that and I can give you some feedback on that for sure.
That's very kind of you. And we will we'll drop that color palette. I'll get that color palette off you, and we'll pop it in the YouTube description down there for a while. So that'll live there for a while. So go grab it if you're seeing this. Probably won't stay there forever. Links can't stay forever. I'll forget about it one day and go, why is this sitting in my Dropbox? But we'll sort that out, no problem. And just before we do sign out, the chat's been amazing. It's been so good hanging out with you, and thanks everyone that's kind of coming across from all different worlds. But we've got some more stuff coming very, very soon. So this has been our schedule for the rest of the week. We're here for the next 2 days around the same time. Tomorrow, hanging out with Ian Haig at 9 o'clock in Premiere Pro. There's some beginner stuff and also some advanced stuff in there. And then on Saturday at 8 a.m., wake up with me and Jeff Chen. We're going to do some speed painting. So it's 8 a.m. in Australia. A lot of parts of the world, it's going to be the Friday afternoon. So just an hour earlier than our stream today. Jeremy and everybody, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have you back on very, very soon. Thank you, chat. Thank you, Johanna, for looking after us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for logging in, and thanks for being an awesome host as always.
Good to hang out with you. All right. See you later, everyone.
See ya.